Hey y'all, it's Danny with Escape Power Sports, and I got this Commander pulled in our tarp tree shop here today in order to try and get her decked out with some lights. So the goal here today is to get this Commander thrown as much light as we possibly can for as cheap as possible. And I'm expecting this to be a relatively straightforward 12 beer job or so just kick back while I share with y'all every step, and there's really nothing left to do now but just get her done. Well, hell yeah, time traveling's cool. A couple days and closer to a case of beer later, we got her done. As you can see here, we got some sweet lights mounted up here on the bumper, as well as this giant 42-inch, 600-watt, 40,000 lumen bar up front, as well as a couple backup lights. Not to mention all these sweet-looking factory-style Can-Am switches. And it'll be getting dark out there before too long, so what y'all say we take her out for a little test when it does? Alright, y'all, while we're waiting for the sun to go all the way down there behind the mountain, I figure there's a couple things that are definitely worth knowing about these cheap-ass Chinese light bars. So I suppose the first thing you need to know about Chinese light bars is that they are cheap as hell. But then again, so is that 30 rack of Budweiser on sale at the supermarket. Anyhow, we'll get into a full cost breakdown of this complete setup here shortly, but it is worth noting that the low price tag on these bars does come at the expense of some lower quality components, especially when compared to the Rigid, Tusk, and Cree light bars of the world. Another thing worth mentioning is that both this 600-watt curved bar we have mounted up top and this other 42-inch bar we're going to be talking about in this video both have a supposed waterproof rating of IP68, which in theory means we should be able to take this bar a full 1.5 meters underwater for at least 30 minutes and it should not take in any water. But I'd be pretty skeptical of those numbers, so all you guys who like taking them out in the mud and stuff, I wouldn't put a 5-foot snorkel over this bike and run it underwater because I'm not sure this China bar would hold it. We're also not going to be spraying these China bars with the pressure washer, are we, Joy? Guess not. And I've also read that the 40,000 lumen rating on this China light bar on the front don't mean shit because of these lower quality reflectors. And hell, the flood row in the middle of this triple row bar don't even have any damn reflectors. So just be aware that these China bars will throw less usable light relative to their rating as compared to their American counterparts. But given the price difference, I think I could probably live with that. And these cooling fins on the back of the bar ain't as big or as nice as some of the American ones. But I figure they'll still be a hell of a lot brighter than the stock headlights. So with all that being said, if you're the kind of guy who enjoys having the highest quality components on your rig and are in a position to afford them, these Chinese light bars ain't for you. But don't worry, I'll be sure to leave links to the best of the best light bars on the market today in the description below. But for the rest of us, I do want to go ahead and warn you guys, please don't click the links in the description for the best of the best, because you just might shit your britches whenever you see how much those fancy light bars cost. I know I did anyway. But on a serious note, the last thing I want to mention about this cheap setup is that it's not exactly a plug and play install. So I'd really like to encourage you to set aside the time, if you can, to watch the video all the way through and see if me sharing what I've learned over the years of installing these cheap bars can't save you a little time or frustration. Even if this video turns out quite a bit longer than I would have liked it to.
But I'll leave timestamps in the description below if you need to skip to a specific topic.
Alright y'all, well y'all are lucky and got to see how this little light project turned out. But I guess the first step is to kind of talk about the tools, lights and mounts and switches and stuff. We're going to need to get this project done and go ahead and get this stuff unboxed. So let's go ahead and get that done right now. Alright y'all, so I got it all unboxed here, and over the years of putting a bunch of different lights on a bunch of different bikes, this seems to be about the brightest, cheapest, best looking setup I've been able to piece together on Amazon on the cheap. But let's go ahead and get right into what all we got going on here. So let's start with the board and stuff as far as how we're going to mount these bars on the front. I bought this setup right here, and it looks like it was about 25 bucks. And I read in some of the reviews that we might have to bend this bracket in order to do it, but I figured we'll try that bolt-on setup. And then another option is these clamps like this for bolting on our light bars in the front, and they just kind of bolt together, and then you bolt your light bar right there. And I've actually got a flat 42-inch hung up, and you can see there's a way to make that work depending on what kind of windshield setup you got. And I've used these $14 clamps in the past for some other projects, and I like them pretty good. They seem to bolt right up, and they actually come with a bunch of different little rubber spacers in case you're working on another machine with a different size roll bar. But I am curious to see how these $25 brackets work out, because they're supposed to bolt right up to the Commander's stock holes here, or actually probably there on the inside. But we'll see later on how those play out. I figured that'd look pretty sweet if those work. So with the boring shit out of the way, let's get to the fun part, and that is the lights. For the backup lights, I like these cute Queen China-made 6-inch cubes. They're really damn bright. I've used them on a couple of projects, and you will end up having to grab a harness to go with it, and you could just stop there and drill some holes and mount them up, but I figure we'll go all out and show how to bolt them up with the same brackets we were talking about a minute ago, and went ahead and bought this $10 fancy backup light switch to go with our fancy LED light bar switch. And these are only 36 watt, 3600 lumen cubes, but honestly, that's pretty damn bright. And trust me, whenever you're backing up off a trailer at night or loading that box after dark, you'll appreciate those 3600 lumens a piece. And they actually come with 4. I couldn't find just 2 of them, so I did end up paying the $35 for all 4 of them. But I figure we'll find a way to use those later. All right, so we're finally to the main attraction, and that is going to be talking about the big light bar we're going to end up putting on the front of this machine. In the past, I've usually gone with these 180 watt, 42 inch flat Chinese light bars, and they do look a little cheap and cheesy. But in all reality, at only 40 bucks, these things throw a ton of light for the money and are a really good bang for the buck. And this one's been going for years in my enclosed trailer, and still appears to be holding up just fine and throws a ton of light for the money. But I figured we go all out for this video, so I went ahead and picked up these 2 bad boys, and this one in the front is kind of the middle of the range option, I suppose. It's a 42 inch curved, it's 350 watt, 36,000 lumens, 36,000 lumens, that's a lot of freaking light. And I think I got it shipped to the house for 55 bucks in 2 days, and it came with a harness, so that was pretty sweet. And I've used those curved ones and those flat 42s in the past, but what I've never used is this bad looking son-of-a-bitch I saw on Amazon whenever I was going to order all these parts. And this dude is a 600 watt, 40,000 lumen, spot, flood, all kind of combination sort of light, and I think this is going to be the bar that ends up on this machine. Anyway, so this bar is not hundreds or even thousands of dollars like some of the other ones I've seen online. I paid $60 for this bar shipped to the house, and I did end up having to get the $20 heavy duty 600 watt freaking harness to go with this giant light, but I'm really excited to see how much light this freaking thing throws at night. And I know it can be pretty damn overwhelming, all the different options for these kind of cheap light bars over there on Amazon, so I'll try and leave the links in the description in such a manner that it's easy to follow and stuff like that. So all in all, we're looking at about 60 bucks for a set of backup lights, and you could shave some off that if you didn't need this sweet switch or the mounts to bolt on if you wanted to drill it. And definitely going to get out the door for less than 100 bucks with any of the light bars you choose for the big light bar on the front. So for less than 200 bucks and a Saturday afternoon well spent, we can totally change the experience of riding this Commander around at night. And I figure you'll have a hard time beating that at your local dealer, probably damn near anywhere. But I figure that's plenty enough chit chat probably for one whole damn lifetime. So let's go ahead and crack another beer and get right to bolting these things up. And I almost forgot to mention before we go ahead and mount this bad boy up, it probably don't hurt to check and make sure this China light bar actually works. Let's see if we can hook it up somewhere. Oh, I'm blind!
So let's get started by showing how to mount this curved 35,000 lumen light bar with these $14 mounts. And these mounts simply bolt onto the roll cage with the included 4mm Allen bolts and lock washers. Then we can attach the legs to the light bar itself, but I found with just the original bolt and washers, it wouldn't tighten these legs down onto the bar. So I just grabbed another couple washers from a spare parts bin, and sure enough, with the included bolt, lock washer, normal washer, one of my extra washers, the leg facing away from the bar, and the spirally looking adjusting washer, it tightened right up to the bar. But once it's tight, I like to back it off just a hair and leave it just a little bit loose to leave some room for adjusting. And then I just attach the leg for the other side in the same manner with the included 5mm Allen wrench.
All right, so we got our little legs on here on the bar, and we do want these legs facing towards the outside of the bar and not towards the inside for this job. And these little rubber pads are going to go between the leg and the mount on the machine, but I think we're going to have an issue here because these little tiny bolts that the light bar came with just barely stick through this mount, and then once you add the leg and a spacer, that ain't a whole lot of thread. So let's go find some better bolts for this job. Not to mention, they'll actually just slide right through, so there ain't no way that's gonna work. No worries though, hardware store's right around the corner. So it's looking like any quarter 20 or M6 bolt that's at least 1.5 inches is gonna work for attaching this leg to the bracket, but I'd rather drill out this hole in this tiny little bracket so we can fit this bigger 3/8 bolt and attach it that way. So let's do that real quick.
And with the legs now taking the larger bolts, I tilted the mounting brackets in on each side and hung up that light bar. And if you're going to go with these mounts for this machine, expect to spend a couple minutes adjusting and getting the bar nice and level, and centered up left and right on the front of the machine.
Alright y'all, so after some fine tuning, that's on there pretty straight and centered. I generally like using these brackets like that. That seemed to work pretty good. But you do want the wire here, over here on the driver's side, because our battery is under there. Oh yeah, and I forgot to test this one, so let's test this one.
And my intuition says it's probably a good idea to put some thread locker on these bolts if you're going to be going with this setup, so the bolts don't back out while we're flying down the trail. Now I'd say these mounts with a curved 42-inch bar work and look pretty damn good. But let's take a look at mounting that triple row 600 watt bar with those brackets that bolt to the existing holes in the frame.
So I was test fitting these brackets and I couldn't get it to go on there right, and I figured out why, because it'll go through this hole good. Yep, see, it goes through that hole, but it won't go through this one, and it looks like there's a little piece of frame or something in the way, so we're going to bust out the drill for the second time for this bolt-on job. So I left this other bar with these other kind of brackets on there while we hung this up, just to show you kind of what I was talking about, how I was thinking. These might have to take some bending. Let me just set you down here and show you what I mean. Alright, so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. There's at least an inch gap over here on this side, and yep, there's a gap over there. So let's pull those brackets back off and see if we can't bend them back and make them do what we need them to do for this. So I figure the goal for bending this thing is to make this bend like a harder bend, to move that arm in more, and then bend this outer ear out so it'll line up a little better. But we'll see how it goes. Alright, so we want to bend this in. So I guess we're going to bend like that. That actually worked half decent. I don't want to jinx it. Now let's try and bend this ear out just a hair. That's going to be harder. Not strong enough. Alright, fuck it. She's going in the vise. Alright, y'all bear with me. This is the first time I've ever tried to bend anything halfway. Exactly. Let's go use the vise that's actually bolted down. Alright, so we're trying to bend that ear back out. Let's see how that goes. Ah, fuck. I think I bent it at the wrong spot. And we'll try and bend this one too. Jesus. Maybe this side's just better for bending brackets. I think that bent a little bit. And then let's try and bend this ear back out. Well, it looks like this one came out pretty good. But unfortunately, not so much over here. Yep, it's looking kind of like I was figuring. This one's not bad at all. You could get a bolt through there if you had to. And then you come over to this side, or this elbow needs to bend deeper in, and then the ear needs to pop back out as well. But we'll give it another shot and try it again. Alright y'all, it's Sunday morning. I had to call it last night because my phone battery was dying, but we'll get right back to it today. I think we left off with getting these brackets bit into a position where we can get our 600 watt badass bar mounted up here on the top. And I'm going to leave this other bar up for the time being just to help me hold it. I actually lowered it down a little bit, but honestly, these brackets came out pretty good. I like the way those look, and I'd be satisfied with those. But I told you all we test out these brackets, so let's get right to that. We'll bolt them up with these 9/16 bolts, washers, and lock nuts. And then all that's going to be left is find a spot to mount our rear lights, wire up all our switches, and hell, we'll be done.
So the mount goes on the outside of the roll cage. And I figured it'd probably be safer to run the bolts from the inside, so there's not a bolt and nut protruding inside the cab in the event of a rollover. And the head of the bolts are actually a 14mm that are secured with the 13mm lock nuts. And all of these bolts, nuts, and washers were included with these $26 mounts we had to bend. Then I just hung up the bar and secured it with a 5mm Allen bolt, lock washer, and adjusting washer that were included with the bar.
So that was definitely a pain to get these brackets bent back into a position where they'd bolt in good. But we got it done, and we'll get this other light bar out of the way and fine tune it, get it centered up and everything, and then tighten up all the bolts, and then this front bar will be mounted. I think we're definitely going to go with this badass 600 watt bar, and we'll give these brackets a shot. That'll leave us a little more flexibility for when I build the roof and windshield, so stay tuned if you want to see how to make those yourself. The whole thing seems damn secure now that we got it bent, but if you do end up with these, just be aware you are going to have to bend those. But let's move on to some backup lights. That looks good, I think. I don't know about y'all, but for my taste, less than $100, that ain't bad at all. And I know it's going to be bright.
So these cute queen backup lights come with a really cool little mounting bracket that allows for adjusting the angle of the light bar up or down. And they also bolt right to the $14 clamp style roll cage mounts we talked about earlier. So to get started attaching this bracket to our backup lights, we'll run the included 13mm bolt through the big hole on the bottom, since you can't attach it after the light's already on the bracket. Then I loosely attach the light to the bracket with the 4 included 4mm Allen bolts, lock washers, and washers, leaving us with a light ready to get mounted up. And of course repeated the process of attaching the brackets to our other backup light. And with the lights all ready, it's time to pick a spot on the back of the machine and attach our 2 roll cage clamp mounts with their 4mm Allen bolts and lock washers in a place of your choosing. Then it was as simple as attaching the lights to the mounts with the 13mm bolt, washer, lock washer, and 13mm nut we attached to the light bracket earlier.
Okay, y'all, so I got these backup lights mounted up, and I wanted to just show you real quick how adjustable these are. Here's some 5mm Allens that we secured them to the bracket with. Oh, I still got it loose, so I can... But anyway, these 5mm Allens let you adjust the angle of the light, you know, like point it up or point it down at the ground. Obviously when we're using the mount here, we can adjust, you know, in, out, stuff like that. There's also a 6mm Allen on the back of the light. So as you can see, this light is kind of all the way to the side of the bracket, and that one's centered up. I think I like it a little bit better centered up like that, so I'll probably change this back. But if you did want to save the $10 for the mounts, it'd be no problem. Just drill some holes right there, and then you'd have them hanging down right here, and those look pretty sweet that way too.
And after quite a bit of adjusting, I got them about right where I wanted them. But since these cute queen lights come in a box of 4, I figured it wouldn't hurt to show how to mount these lights up by drilling some holes, saving the $14 for the clamp style mounts. So I just center punched and drilled these holes in the front bumper. And tried to eat out the holes in the brackets included with the lights to make room for a bigger, longer bolt.
Ouch.
And after spending at least 10 minutes trying to unfuck the light bracket I bent up, they're ready to bolt on.
Joy, come here, look. Alright, y'all, so since they came with 4 of them, I figured we'd find a decent spot for it, and I kind of half like that. So now that we got all our light bars mounted up, we got our light bar up here with the brackets, and then those extra 2 up there, and of course our backlights are set up. Now it's time for the fun part of this job, and that is a question of where to put the switches. So if there's room in the switch panel right here, there's only 1 spot, so that ain't gonna work. I would just put them there, is where I typically do it. And then I was thinking maybe put one like right there, and then another one right there. But I also picked up this little panel that holds 2 of them, and there's a couple spots we could try. And actually, after taking a closer look, I think I'm going to mount both of them together in this little thing like I was talking about over here somewhere, so I'm not actually going to have to pull the dash. Anyway, y'all comment below, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, what spot y'all like best?
I thought that was half decent. That ain't bad. With the ridges there, that might get a little wonky. I figured it'd be kind of in the way right there. That's not a bad spot there either.
But anyway, y'all comment below where y'all think they should have gone, and let's put them where they're going.
So once I've got a good spot for my panel or a switch picked out, I like to just hold it up in place and trace the outline of it with a pencil. Then I'll usually grab a box blade and very slowly and carefully begin tracing the inside of those pencil lines. And usually once you have the entire outline traced, you can begin cutting a little deeper and deeper with each pass. Careful though, as it's very easy to cut over the line or accidentally cut yourself. I also usually try these cutting wheels on the drill, but find it takes some serious concentration to try and control those. And once I have the rough opening cut out, I'll grab a file to get the hole squared up enough and just right so the switch panel can pop in there.
Alright, so that worked out half decent. If y'all know of any better tools to do that, I'm looking at the phone right now and I'm 17 minutes into that hole. Box blade will do it, and those little wheels on the drill will help, but if y'all know of any better tools, maybe a Dremel or something, comment below on that as well, because that takes way too damn long. Alright y'all, so I think that spot's actually pretty decent. It's kind of out of the way, and I've only got them halfway in there. They'll be more out of the way once you pop them all the way in. I like to leave them halfway out, because once they're in, they're really kind of tough to get all the way back out, and we still got to plug them in and stuff. Speaking of plugging them in, now it's about time to start running wires to all of our lights, and I figure we'll start with these lights in the back, because I think they're going to be a little bit easier to run the wires to, and instead of yanking the center console and the plastic behind the seat and the side skirts and all that baloney, I figure we'll just start with this plastic under the driver's seat. It's got 4 pop rivets in the back, 2 on each of these sides of that bar right there, 2 more running down this side, 3 holding to the floor, and 2 more right there. So I guess that's 11 pop rivets we got to yank to get this piece out. Let's get on it. And when I'm removing these 11 pop rivets, I usually find it's helpful to bag and label the bolts as they come out so I don't lose them. Alright, so this plastic under the driver's seat ain't wanting to come out at all. I think it's hung up on this side panel, so let's go ahead and yank the couple pop rivets we got left on it as well. And it looks like there's a Torx 30 bolt with a 10mm nut on the back. I don't know if you can see it in there. That's holding the strap for this damn net on. We're going to go ahead and yank that as well so we can get this plastic all the way freaking out. Alright, well that son of a bitch of a piece of plastic is finally out. I wish we had a spare belt, seeing as we're halfway there to changing it, but I guess you can go ahead and subscribe because we'll probably be doing a video on that too.
And I also removed these 4 Torx 30 star bolts to make running the harness behind that front fender a lot easier.
Alrighty, now that we got some access, I figured we'd go ahead and unpack the wiring harness we got here with to go with our backup lights. Alright, so this piece here is our relay, and it's going to help protect our wiring, I suppose, and there's also a fuse to help with that as well, and looks like they already got one in there for us. So this red and black will connect to our battery. This is obviously the switch that came with it. We're going to unplug these shortly as we're doing our own switch for this job. Here are the wires that we need to run back towards our backup lights, and looking at them, I'm not sure these are going to be long enough, so we might have to extend them. Only one way to find out. Let's toss it in the bike and run these wires from the battery back to our backup lights. Alright y'all, so we've got the wires run. I just zip tied the relay right there and then ran the wires for our backup lights down through there, and put them out here. And the only issue is they're not long enough. So we're going to have to extend them, and my plan is to solder them together, because I figure that's about as permanent of a connection as you can get. But I figure also wouldn't be a bad idea to test these lights and this harness before we cut into it. Oh, well looky there, that's pretty sweet. That one's working. And that one is working. Hell yeah. Alright, time to add 6 foot of wire.
And to extend this harness, all I did was cut the 2 wires running towards the back and add 5 foot or so of new wire. The color of the new wire shouldn't matter as long as it's about the same size as the wires we're tapping into. So my technique for soldering wires is to start by removing the wire insulation, exposing about a ½ inch of the copper strands underneath. Then I like to try and fray out them copper strands and spread out the wires before twisting them together. And with the wires temporarily twisted together, I'll apply the heat with the tip of the solder gun. And once the wires are hot, I'll begin dabbing on the solder. And I'll know the wires are hot enough for this when the wires begin taking the solder and it instantly melts into the wires, fusing them together for a permanent connection. And I usually like to start by adding solder in the middle of the connection and keep adding solder towards the outsides until it appears to have soaked through the entire overlap of the wires. And after they have cooled, that's typically when I'd slide some shrinking heat wrap over the connection. But embarrassingly, I was out of the correct size shrink tubing, so I had to get away with just wrapping each of the individual connections with electrical tape before taping the entirety of these new wires for additional protection. But in general, having the shrink wrap is absolutely the best way to do it in my opinion. And y'all, I'm by no means an expert on soldering, so if you are, or really just have any thoughts or suggestions on how I can improve my technique, please leave a comment in this section below, as I'm always looking to improve.
Well, that only took about an extra 10 minutes, so that ain't too terrible. Extending the harness 6 feet helped out a bunch, and then I ran it back here. It's kind of hard to show. I'll get a better shot of this later, but I kind of ran it up here, up this panel, and then it's going to run along this rail, and then over to that light and over to this one. But you'll notice in the wiring harness that came with for these backup lights that we ordered, it came with a bunch of these little blue male connectors. And what those are going to do is hook up to the little wires that are hanging off our lights right now. And so we'll just grab a set of pliers, crimp them on, and then we'll be able to plug directly into those connectors for the harness.
And these connectors are cheap and prone to failure, so definitely give them a little tug after you crimp them on and make sure they're on there good. And this would definitely be one of the first places I'd check if your lights aren't working after you hook everything up. With all that being said, I usually just replace these crap connectors with the slightly better connectors from a convenient variety pack I also got on Amazon, or just solder the harness to the wires from the lights for a permanent connection. We'll also want to make sure we have the route for the wiring finalized before plugging them in, as the less we have to plug or unplug these connectors, the less likely they are to fail.
Alright, so after extending the harness 6 feet, of course the wires are still too short in between the two lights to span all the way across here. No worries though, we'll just add some another 6 inches of wire or so with some connectors. And I figure this is as good a time as any to show you all how these cool little connectors work, instead of, in case you don't want to go the soldering route.
So to use these solder seal wire connectors, we just splice away the insulation and slide the copper wires we want to attach together in from both sides, and crimp the silver solder with pliers to hold them in place. And finally, just apply heat with a hairdryer or heat gun until the solder in the middle is melted and the shrink wrap is tight on the wires. And of course, I taped each connection individually before plugging in the connectors, taping those connections individually as well, and finished by taping all of the exposed wire before securing the loom to the roll cage with zip ties. And on a side note, if this machine had a sound system on it, I'd definitely be installing an auxiliary battery, but I'm thinking it's going to be alright with just these LED light bars and the winch. And these switches do have a tiny LED backlight that stays on all the time, but it shouldn't be enough to drain the battery on this bike, especially if we take it out for a ride more than once a year.
Alright y'all, so with the backup lights pretty well half-ass wired up, let's move on to the big bar up there in the front. And to do that, we got this heavy duty series 600 watt harness, and it's got the same relay, fuse, and connectors for the battery, as well as some connections for this switch that was actually included, but we'll probably stick with the Can-Am looking switch. Anyway, so now we need to find a way to route these wires from the battery up to our bar. And I'm thinking I'm going to use this hole right here that's already drilled in the machine. Probably have to drill it out a little bit because I don't think it's going to be kind of tough, but let's get right on it.
So I drilled out that hole so it fit our wires and spent 10 frustrating minutes trying to fish the wires through with my hands crammed up under the dash and using an assortment of pliers. Before I remembered the easy way to do this by running them gator clips through the hole, grabbing onto the wires we need to pull through, and just easing them out of that hole.
Hell yeah. Alligator clips are the way to do that.
Then I just crimped on some better connectors like we did in the back, taped up the connections and all the exposed wires, and zip tied the loom to the back of the roll cage for a slick look from the front.
That hole and using the alligator clips to pull the wires through seemed to work pretty good. You know, that's clean enough for me. I suppose you could make it look a whole hell of a lot better without the zip ties and the wire exposed if you wanted to drill a hole in the roll bar and try and run it through there, but honestly that sounds like more of a pain in the ass than it's worth to me. So I think we're just going to stick with this. Now all we got to do is figure out how we're going to wire up these lights up here in the front. Should be interesting. Alright y'all, so the way I see it, we got two options on how to wire up these lights in the front. The smart option would probably be just to order a whole nother harness and add another switch. We've got a perfect spot in the dash. Another option might be to tap in and make our own harness running up to those two wires from these two extra plugs that go to the harness for the big bar. And I'm thinking we're going to do a combination of that, maybe. We'll have to see. I found this old harness that went to that flat bar that was in the trailer. So let's get it pulled apart. It's got a sweet switch to go with it. Let's get it pulled apart and see how much of this is still usable and make a call from there. And on a side note, it was working when I pulled it, but you know, that's some famous last words right there if I ever heard them. But only one way to find out, so let's start digging into this thing and see what we got. All right, y'all. So after looking at this harness for a minute, it looks like we're going to need to replace the connectors for the switch. But other than that, that seems about it. It seems to be in pretty decent shape. We'll add some female connectors on the wires headed to the lights. Put some males on the lights, make sure it all works, and then probably just go ahead and use it because I kind of like this sweet little switch. We'll call that our fog light switch. I was thinking about it would be a lot easier to just snip it right there for the wires running to the lights and add it to our harness for this big bar. But something about tapping into this 600 watt harness just don't seem right to me. Maybe if y'all know a little bit more about electricity, you could tell me why that's a terrible idea, but it don't feel right. So we're gonna try and just use this harness over here, even if it means we're gonna have friggin' 3 relays, fuses, and switches right there under the dash. But ain't no problem, nothing to it but to do it. Let's get it done. Alright, y'all, so I replaced all these connectors for the switch, and the switch is a little different than the other ones. Instead of all the wires running from the relay, it's only got this one white wire, which I assume is some kind of signal to the relay, whether or not the switch is on. Then it's got a power wire that we can either run to our battery, or I might just tap it into a wire that has power when the ignition is on. The switch also has a ground. The relay has a positive and a negative with a fuse in it as well. But anyways, I also added our connectors to our lights and the ends of this harness. So let's flip the switch and see what happens. I haven't done it yet, so I'm as curious as y'all are. Oh yeah. Yep, I think we're going to use this harness and this switch. So, let's get to doing that now. And I also just realized I forgot to test this light bar before we wrapped up all these connections and everything. So probably a good idea to go ahead and test it. I've got the old switch wired up here. It appears to be working that way. Before we get any further into this project. Oh, hell yeah, that works. Awesome. Now we can get back to them front lights. So I'm looking around to see where we're going to mount this switch right here.
And at first I was thinking right there would be convenient, but then I noticed your knee might be able to get a hold of it that way. And same sort of deal right there. I think it looked pretty sweet right here, but unfortunately it's going to be tough to get a drill right in there. But then I think
I found a spot. I think I might be able to squeeze it in right there above where these other two are. So let's give that a shot.
And I forgot to mention earlier when we were mounting the other switches, it's always a good idea to check behind the plastics for other wires or parts before cutting or drilling into our dash. And to mount up this style switch, it's a lot easier than them other ones, and I just marked the spot I wanted to drill and drilled incrementally bigger holes until the switch fit in through from the back. And once the switch fit through the hole, I just tightened it down with a small nut that comes with that style of switch.
Alright, so I got that little switch mounted up right there. I think that looks pretty good. Good enough for me anyway. Anyway, now we got to figure out how we're going to run all these wires up to the front up here. So I guess we'll end up pulling the dash out after all, and we can pop this radiator cover off. It's just got these 3 little rubber grommets. Come off there, you fuck. Come on. Alright. It's just held in with those 3, no tools required to get that out. Now we got a little bit better access. We'll probably try and follow the wires that run through here naturally. Pop this out real quick, see. Yeah, let's go ahead and pull that dash.
And the dash on your Commander will pop right out with the glove box open after removing the 2 Torx T25 star bolts on the top and the 2 pop rivets on each side of the dash. And with the dash out, it was easy to begin running the wires for the front lights over the steering and through the hole for the harness to get them behind the dash. And eventually towards the front of the machine from there, avoiding any moving parts and following the stock harness as best I could, where they could be safely plugged in, taped up, and secured with zip ties behind the front fascia.
And on a side note, I'd say that winch cable, that steel cable, is about ready to be replaced. I've never had one with a synthetic rope, so we'll probably go ahead and just throw a synthetic rope in there. So you might want to subscribe if you want to see a how-to as I learn how to do that as well. Alright, y'all, so I went ahead and got all the wires ran up here to these front lights, and I went ahead while I was at it and connected them, taped them up, and secured all the wires. And if you can see, I got them running down this frame rail there, up the frame there, over the radiator. And from there, I pretty much just followed the stock harness for the driver's side headlight. And if you've seen some of our winch videos, you know I'm a big believer that securing and routing wires with zip ties is more of an art than a science. But something I find that helps is to bend the wires like this. And then you can kind of loop it around a little more easily in tight spaces like that and get what you need to do. If you look under here, I don't know if you can see, I've got them running once they come up in here behind the dash, through the stock loom there, up and out of the way of the steering and everything there. And while I was at it, I went ahead and secured these wires running from the backup lights down, down this frame rail here. but just went ahead and secured all that up. As far as all the slack goes for this big light bar in the front, I just stuffed it back in there after securing it with some zip ties, and I went ahead and zip tied all 3 of our relays right here so they're all in one spot, and have all our wires for the battery right here in a convenient spot. It's still kind of a clusterfuck under here, but to be expected when it comes to adding 3 harnesses with relays, fuses, and all these extra wires. So I suppose all I gotta do now is pop back in the radiator covers, hood, dash, side panel, plastic under the driver's seat, driver's seat itself, and then we'll be ready to talk about how to wire up these sweet factory looking Can-Am switches. Let's get right back to it. But I guess it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and check these backups just before we throw it all back together. And hell yeah, they're still working perfect. Alright y'all, let's take a look at how to wire up this switch. First we're going to pull it out of our little panel there, or knock it on the floor, and then run our wires through the panel and plug them in. And I don't know if y'all can see this little drawing here. Maybe we'll get a picture up on the screen while I'm talking about it, but it looks like we'll start with the black being the ground on these top 2. And this is for our big LED light bar, and it came with these little double connectors for the ground, and I'm assuming this white wire is for the battery, or for the positive, and it goes on this middle one and right there. And then I suppose we'll call this the signal wire for the switch. Goes in our last remaining switch right here. There it is. And once we hook this up to the battery, this should work good. We'll just run our wires through and pop it back into place. Nice. Now let's do our backup switch. And here's the original switch for the backup, and we'll just go ahead and unplug these. Come off there. All right. Run it through the back. Let's make some of them double connectors real quick. And it turns out I had some of these double connectors that'll let you attach to both of them from another set of switches, but if you needed to make them, you just put 2 wires into that female connector, put a female connector on that one, and then a male for that one. And so let's go ahead and wire this up real quick. So again, these top 2 are for the ground, and then this middle one and this bottom right are for our positive. And then I'm just going to attach this one for our wire going to the light, so that way all the plugs are at the same spot. Oh fuck, that connector's messed up. 2 of these 3 connectors are messed up. It looks like I bent them when I was yanking them off the old switch. That was kind of stupid. But instead of just cutting the wire right here, we've got all this extra slack anyway, plus this little plug. I've seen these fail, so I figured why not just add the connectors further back so we got less crap under the dash we got to tuck away. So let's go ahead and add these connectors real quick. Check out these fancy wire splicers I picked up at a garage sale the other day. Nice. Alright, let's crimp on some connectors. Alright, that all worked pretty good. So, we'll plug our black into our black for the ground on the top 2. One that's going from the middle and this bottom right into this white wire, which I believe is our positive. Hopefully. It'll plug in. Yep, that plugged in pretty good. This bottom left will go to this blue wire that's headed towards the light. Tape up these connections and stick her back in. Oh, shoot! Shoot! I forgot to run it through the hole. Oh, hopefully I don't jack these connectors up on plugging it. Definitely want to run the wires through the hole before you freaking tape them up like so. That was stupid. Alright, with the wire running through the hole and it plugged in, now we're finally ready to actually pop that back in there. Now hopefully those work when we hook everything up to the battery. And when I hooked up all the wires to our battery, the light sure did work, and yours will too. But if you found any of this light bar install information helpful for your Can-Am Commander, do me a quick favor and give the video a thumbs up so I'll know we're on the right track here. And as always, if I missed anything or you have any thoughts or suggestions on how I can improve these videos, or really any comments on this LED light bar topic in general, please leave a comment in the section below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd also really like to thank the 500 or so of you guys who found some of the how-to content on this channel and decided to subscribe. And for those of y'all who are keeping count, those are beers number 103 through 127 on our way to finishing the Escape Powersports 1,000 Beer Challenge. So definitely stay tuned to see what other videos we add to our Commander how-to video series on our way to finishing the Escape Powersports 1,000 Beer Challenge. I'm Danny with Escape Powersports. I really want to thank y'all for watching this thing all the way through. And until next time, we'll see y'all on the trails.